Just a note that this meeting will be recorded, and we hope to be able to share it in the future for others. So thank you for joining us today. My name is Carrie McCullen. I am the Forest Supervisor at Turnbull Creek Educational State Forest. The Education State Forest is the one that is bringing you F.L.A.M.E Week. And just a little bit of information about F.L.A.M E Week. F.L.A.M E is an acronym for Fire Learning and Mitigation Education. It was a concept that was brought into play just last year. So we're at our second annual event this year. And it is meant to bring awareness to wildfires and prescribed burning in North Carolina. So we have a great presentation planned for today, and I'm looking forward to sharing with you what we have. Thank you again for jumping online and attending our webinar today. Just a few housekeeping logistics. For those of you that have not been on a webinar in a little bit, we do have some different features here. We have the chat function, which is at the bottom of the screen in that red circle. That's where we're going to be entertaining questions today. So feel free, whenever you have a question, just go ahead and pop it into our chat feature. Make sure as you go through that your video and your microphones are muted during the webinar. You can see at the bottom left hand of your screen, those are your options there. To ask a question, make sure that the to section has everyone highlighted in blue. That will be sent to our chat moderators who are going to be looking through chat, answering any questions as they come up, or to answer them during our Q&A session. Your question, of course, will populate in the chat window. And then if you want to change your viewing settings during the webinar, you can hit the view button at the top right-hand corner. And of course, at the end of the session, please click the end button in red at the bottom. Okay, so without further ado, we'll go into our objectives. Today, we are going to learn about fire weather and how weather impacts fire in general. Then we'll hear from some seasoned wildfire experts and their experiences with fire and weather on 3 large wildfire incidents in the state. And by seasoned, I mean that these gentlemen have over 72 combined years of experience working wildfires in North Carolina and on the national level on incident management teams. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. First up today, we have Jamie Dunbar. He is the Fire Environment Staff Forester with the North Carolina Forest Service. Jamie's going to be going through with us a sort of fire weather year in review, what's been going on in the last year, also covering some potential current weather conditions and how they may impact wildfire activity in the current month. And then he's going to go forward and give us future outlooks for weather and wildfires in the state and what that might look like. So Jamie, go ahead and take it away.
All right, good morning, everybody. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Okay, hopefully everybody should be seeing my presentation at this point. Anyway, again, very happy to be with y'all today. I'm going to do a discussion on the fire environment, which, it encompasses weather and fuels and topography and everything sort of interacting together. So a quick background on the fire environment program. What do we do? What's my job or role? Well, I'm part of the central office fire staff team, and we support all aspects of the agency's fire environment program. So in my position, I'm a forester, professionally trained as a forester, and I've got emphasis in geospatial science or remote sensing, which is useful for this program. And full disclosure, I'm not a climate scientist and I'm not a forecaster. I'm a forester. Fire environment. So what is it? All right, so technically, it's the surrounding conditions and influences and the modifying forces that determine a wildfire's behavior. It's a mouthful. I get that. But, you're looking at weather, topography, and fuel conditions and how they interact with the human factor, especially here in the Southeast. So you can see the triangle. Most folks have seen the fire triangle. We have the fire environment, fire behavior triangle listed over there to the right, where you see my laser pointer. So, with that, I provide sort of support and coordination and technical guidance for that fire science program within the agency, a point of contact for the various districts, counties, regions, and then cooperators, be it uh, anything from, U.S. Forest Service, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, uh, NGOs, things like that. So knowledge sharing, troubleshooting, various training support, remote automated weather stations. That's a big thing throughout the state. Our interagency fire danger operating plan. If you look over here, we have a interagency plan between multiple players, in the wildland fire field within the state. And typically each state in the country has one of these. The National Fire Danger Rating System, and work with that. The Smoke Management Program for forestry-related burning, and also an interagency fire environment committee. So that's another very important way that we can share and discuss technical issues, and have rapid knowledge sharing. During project fire organizations, when we have extended attack fires, which will be mentioned later, provide incident support related to the environment, expanded dispatching out of our central office, various briefings and assessments, and so forth. So, like I say, it's a very expansive program. So, background on the organization. Don't know where everybody hails from and what the knowledge level is. So, I just wanted to point out that we're not. It's not only North Carolina. It's not only our agency. We all work together cooperatively to function in the wildland fire field. So, think of it as a local to state to a geographic area, which we're in the southern area. And then, the national and international. Like over the summer, quite a few folks from the U.S. actually went to Canada to support fire operations up there. And a picture over there on the right shows a location of various weather stations within North Carolina and a lot of the southern geographic area. So you can see this interconnected network of different stations, and they all help us with, looking at and predicting a fire danger. So what's fire danger rating areas? All right, so we have to define areas of similar topography and fuels, forest fuels, and things like that. So we've broken the state up into 9 fire danger rating areas. And you can see on the map here, they're color coded, and they're broken up in groups of counties for simplicity. So, I'm not going to delve into too much detail with that, but we were able to predict fire danger for a general area, based upon that. The Southern Highlands and the mountains, the Blue Ridge Escarpment, that area of the mountains that transitions to the Western Piedmont, the Northern Coastal Plain, the Southern Coastal Plain. And then we have the Sand Hills. We've got the Eastern Piedmont, Western Piedmont, basically from points west of Raleigh, going into the escarpment. So, like I say, there's 9 in the state, and there's a multitude of ecoregions. We have a lot of workshops and a lot of work to formulate these fire danger rating areas, and I could have a lot of fun describing the process that goes into it, but just don't have time today. But needless to say, there's a lot that goes into it relating to fuels and topography and similarities. So going forward with the presentation organization, we're going to go over the general fire history and sort of some seasonal patterns from 1970 to 2022. That's fire data that I've got readily available. Then we'll take a look at the 2023 weather summary and 2023 fire activity, some current conditions, looking ahead for the spring. And the main thing, the take home is, we're comparing how does today or tomorrow compare with yesterday or last week, last season, or last year. What's the trend and how is that going to impact the fire environment, and then our readiness and readiness for response, and ultimately, preparing our firefighters and protecting the citizens and resource. So wildfires from 1970 to 2022. The map on the background is just an interesting a map from the olden days, if you will. This was the Allen Road fire. It was, I believe, something like a 94,000 acre fire that started on April 6th in 1985. So, this was a wind-driven fire in Pocosin Fuels in the Albemarle Peninsula, which is now District 13. So to see, trends, right? When are fire seasons? What influences fire seasons, fire danger? And take a look at these maps. This is from a climatologist. You can see the link down below. The wettest and driest months of the year based on climate normals from 81 to 2010. So I just wanted to point out, the wetter months for the coast tend to be, hurricane season and whatnot, June, July, August. And the mountains, especially the southern mountains, you typically see the January, February. And what are the driest months of the year? Well, how does that align with what we would consider fall fire season, especially for the mountains? Well, look, there's October and November for the driest portions of the mountains. So you can see how everything sort of relates, because you have to have the rainfall, you have to have the vegetation state, you have to have all that stuff interacting together to influence fire. So looking from month to month, considering again, the live and dead fuel conditions, the seasonality in it, when is our killing frost in the fall time, going into winter? When's the last freeze and last frost in the spring? What are the dead fuel conditions looking like? And we classify generally, dead fuels into 4 categories based on size and how quickly they gain or lose moisture. The higher the moisture content, the harder it is for those fuels to burn and maintain combustion. The graphic down there at the bottom sort of illustrates what's going on with those sticks or logs or litter that might be out there in the forest. You've got evaporation going on, precip, dew coming in at night, early morning. What's the humidity in the air doing? Is it very dry, or your lips chapped or whatnot? Do you have dew outside? What's going on during the day? What's coming in from the ground? So all those things sort of, go into that fire environment concept. Also in the spring, the accumulation of growing degree days. So if you take a look at in this slide here, this was just a point in between Greenville, North Carolina, and Raleigh. I just picked this morning, sort of illustrate where we stand on heating days or accumulated growing degree days. So you can see it's pretty close to being average for right now. The trouble is as we get into spring, you can have some warm spells followed by some very frigid conditions, and so that can hurt a variety of different plants or species. It could put you back a little bit from what we would consider green up. You also got to look at available soil moisture and drought impacts. What are we getting into from the last year? Are all the plants already stressed? Is the available soil moisture low? Or are we looking good, in a hydrology standpoint? What about weather events? Depending on time of year, do you have dry cold fronts that are very gusty and windy? Are those dry air masses that come in drying out your smaller fuels like the twigs and pine needles and leaves? And that interaction is important. And then across the state, as you can see up here on the top right, the wettest portion of the state's in our District 9 area, south of Asheville. They can have rainfall well above 70 inches, annually. Whereas it sort of tapers off in the mid to upper 40 range for other areas. Like I say, it all depends on where you're at on the landscape. So distribution of fires by acres and month. So it's sort of busy. I've got a few busy slides, but I figured it would be worthwhile to show y'all. So this is from 1970 to 2022. And basically it's an accumulation of fires. That's the blue bars with a fire count for each month. And that's based on discovery date, or so when that fire was first reported. And then acres, that's the red field area. And you can see, for instance, in April, we peak out on acres, but the actual accumulation of fire starts decreased ever so slightly as compared to March. So you can see this typical pattern in the year where you build from January as it warms up, things are going on. March, we've had from 70 to 22, 54,000 fire starts, for North Carolina Forest Service reported fires. So it's quite a lot. You see this trend, and then as we get into the growing season and things calm down a bit, we get more humid, it's hot and muggy outside, things are relatively green. we have fewer fires and fewer acres on normal years. But if we have drought years or some other influence, it's very easy to see, outliers or higher years, especially in the coastal plain with organic smoldering fires and things like that. And then in the fall, we'll also see, the increase coinciding with leaf drop, dormancy of plants, and things like that. And then it tails off into December and in January and then picks back up. So, right now we're in the 1st of February. Another snapshot of wildfires by cause. You may be asking, well, what's the primary, cause of fires in the state? Again, this is just preliminary data I pulled this morning. I just wanted to point out this is from 2004 to 2022 by calendar year, and these are categories that show up in the national system, be it camping, children, debris burning, lightning, incendiary, machine use, and so forth. And you can see just in general terms, the number one contributor or cause of fire in the state is debris burning. We get about 42%. This is average between 04 and 22 is debris burning. So that's still the number one driver of, of escape of, wildfire in the state. And you can see too in lightning on drought years during the summer, you'll have larger, increases in lightning fires. It takes, drier forest, drier duff and pine litter and so forth, be able to better hold and then allow the fire to carry and move across the landscape. And I thought that was pretty interesting. So all fires for the month of January, and this is very busy. This is from 2000 to 2022. I just wanted to show that the majority of fires in January, going back to that previous slide, you've got a lot of fire, but most are very small. You start to pick up some additional fire, some larger ones, 10 to 50 acre scale, a few 150 to 200 acre scale, especially in the coastal areas. And they're scattered all about, but, just as we go forward for the next few slides, you can see the trend in both extra quantity as well as larger fire sizes as we get into what we would, consider spring fire season. So here, this is a distribution of those fires in January from year to year. So the 10-year rolling average from January through 2022 was 305 fires for the state for 511 acres. Well, you can see we have some years that definitely outliers with more acres and more fires. 1981, for example, 1985 going into 86, 2001, 2018, and so forth. And here's February again, like we already mentioned, we start building into fire season. There's more daylight. There's more things that, the heat and solar, the solar heating of fuels. We have wind events, frontal passages, and people, want to get out and do a bit more, yard cleanup and so forth. More equipment fires and things like that. So you can see this building. And again, the 10-year rolling average here, 553 fires for about 1,400 acres. And I wanted to zoom in a little bit because yes, the map's busy, but it's an interesting pattern. So this is a map of fire locations for all fires from the month of February. Again, zoomed in into our districts. And so if you look, like District 5, that shows up, that's part of our Region 2. District 11 is part of our Region 2 or Piedmont region. District 3, District 6, and then the Region 1 or Coastal Plain region starts in District 7 up in the north, District 13 in the Albemarle Peninsula area, District 4, which is the New Bern district, and District 8, which is the Whiteville district. So you can see the fire occurrences and just how they build in February. March, we're getting more conducive fire weather going into the growing season, and typically, some drier conditions. So we have a increase in those 200 plus acre fires, and that shows up in the 22 years of data displayed here. You can see that the background of all the smaller fires that are handled, be it with very quickly and with volunteer fire department resources, with our agency and our cooperators working together. So we do have these larger fires, and they do get more significant as we go into the spring, as shown on this map. April, we begin to tail off on some of the fire due to the green up that's occurring, the growing season beginning, but we do continue to have large fire occurrence, in April. And it really depends on the year and all the fire environment challenges going on right then. So April, you got a 10-year average of 655 fires for 3,200 acres. And some of our largest fires over the past years typically do occur in the April timeframe in the coastal plain. So jumping into climate and weather, now that we sort of set the stage, on the fire activity from 2000 to 2022, let's take a look at this. And these slides were provided by the North Carolina State Climate Office. Quick mention about the Climate Office. They are a UNC system public service center, and they work out of North Carolina State University. And they're very, very helpful with us and with a variety of partners. And they actually manage our fire weather intelligence portal. The recent weather for 2023. So monthly temperature departures, this is from 1901 to 2000 and how 2023 actually, looked by month. So it tied for the 7th warmest year on record. And if you remember back, January and February were pretty warm, and we had those some early green up, some early bud break and whatnot. And then we had some very challenging, cold weather that stunted a variety of crops and things. And you can see, March and April were pretty warm. We got chilly again back in May and June, and it built the whole way through. And December ended up being one of the warmer months as well. Monthly precip, it was the 61st driest year on record, from the 1901 to 2000 range there. So, again, we were able to sort of put it in context in a statewide average. And granted, statewide, it ranges from a 6,000 foot elevation to in the mountains to, near sea level on the coast. And the very dry spell that we began to experience in the September and October, November timeframe, and then as things changed in early December, we saw that increase there. So the precipitation rankings that we had for various locations, this is a very interesting slide. Elizabeth City had the 8th driest record at almost 10 inches below normal, while Highlands and Asheville had very, very high deficits. And if you go back to that first slide we were looking at earlier about rainfall in the state, annual rainfall, these areas, have very, very large amounts of rain. So, these 18, 11-inch deficits and whatnot, they do build up in these systems that are very used to the moisture. Snow, that was another sort of fleeting thing that we had for the November 22 to March 2023 timeframe. Very little snow in the state, and snow is very important for, recharge of the system, as well as compacting fuels, compacting leaves and whatnot. So winter was the 5th warmest and 62nd wettest for that period of time for snowfall last year. Precip deficits going from September 1st to November 30th last year. You can see we were holding along pretty well going into summer, and then things started to dry out. And I don't have any of the slides on this presentation, but the southern part of our geographic area, be it Mississippi, Louisiana, Alabama, and those areas, they were already picking up on very significant drought going into going through the summer all the way through into fall. And we started to pick up on drought conditions more significantly, around September, going the whole way through November 30th. So again, you can see, for example, Greenville was about 5 inches below normal. Some of the sites up there in our northern Highlands fire danger rating area were better, than 7 to 10 inches off. Areas around north of the Pilot Mountain area, Forsyth County, and so forth. We were seeing significant deficits. So they termed that significant and rapid increase one of the terms used is flash drought. And, that's been expressed by climatologists and whatnot. So we saw, a flash drought basically develop in the fall. Take a look at October 3rd. We had abnormally dry conditions, for maybe a third of the state, a little more than a third. And then, come October 31st, we had basically a 2-category degradation. It's a very, very rapid degradation. In flash droughts, it's representative of, not only like hydrological drought, but, what's the impacts to public water systems, what's the impact to agriculture, all those things sort of tied together. And again, we could have a very interesting talk about the drought monitor in that process at another time. This is a picture of Jordan Lake. This is over by our Region 2 headquarters. This was taken by one of my colleagues with Division of Water Resources using a drone. And as you can see, this was, I believe, in October. So the reservoir was definitely lowering, and all the inputs to the system were dwindling. The evaporative demand was high for all these actively growing forests, and it was just pulling water out. And there were actually some water advisories. One of those was noted in Hendersonville at that time. And fall was the 29th warmest and 16th driest, the period of record for the Climate Office's presentation. But here's another way to look at the drought. You can see the North Carolina percent area in U.S. drought monitor categories. Now take a look at this. This is from January 1 of 23. D0, or abnormally dry, is the yellow. And it goes from D1, which is moderate drought, the whole way through to exceptional. We got as high as D3, or extreme drought, in early November, going into December before the rains came, if you will. It's just interesting to see basically some abnormal dryness, through the spring, a little bit in the summer, and then almost 100% of the state was being impacted by November in various categories. So the peak of the drought, this is the map from November 21st. So you can see a significant portion of the state was in extreme drought. And even the only area that had, wasn't classified as being in drought, this was the stretch that one of the hurricane or tropical disturbances came through and gave us significant wetting rain earlier in the period. And that sort of held the analysis for this area. And that's the reason why that was in the none category at that time. So we got into drought, we moved into it, and fall fire season really started to correspond and align with that. So these are 2 images, one being the Collette Ridge wildfire in our District 9, or Southern Highlands fire danger rating area. And this was the Sorrowtown Mountain Fire. This is an image of that north of Winston-Salem. So again, there was a lot of activity going on, throughout the southeastern United States. And we had a lot of activity going on here in North Carolina. Because again, when you have the fire environment align, when you have the fall fire season align, leaf drop, low humidity, warmer temperatures and whatnot, it makes a recipe for enhanced activity. So we had a lot of incident mobilization going on throughout the state. We had resources, I believe, as far away as Washington State come to support us. All right, some wildfires from 2023 to present. This is an image of the Great Lakes Fire. This is from the NCWeb website. And this is just what we were getting into early on in the season. Here's a map of fire locations for calendar year 2023. And again, this is preliminary data. Not everything's been closed out in our system and finalized yet, but I did want to show the fire activity that we had. So somewhere around 5,400 fires for around 76,000 acres, give or take. Right now, things haven't been completely closed at this point. But the larger fires that you see, the red dots, fire names are showing up for fires greater than 399 acres. Otherwise, it'd be too busy. But you can see in District 7, the Never Sell Fire. There was the Great Lakes Fire that we just mentioned, the Last Resort Fire in District 13. the Pulp Road Fire in Brunswick, and then, a series of others, the Sourtown Mountain Fire in our District 10, Poplar Drive in District 1, and then Collette Ridge in District 9 that I mentioned. Not to mention all of the other, multitude of smaller fires that were controlled. So zooming in a little bit, again, just to put it in better context for those that may be, tuning into the webinar locally, you can see sort of patterns of fire activity. This image over here is from Bear Swamp. This was I believe a lightning strike fire in the Chowan County area. This was early, pretty much early in the season, and the drought conditions were already showing up in the District 7 area. So fuel conditions were dry, the duff was dry, and you can see the consumption here. You can see the stump holes had been burned cleanly through. A lot of the larger fuels had been burned, and it was very warm out. And when you have very warm conditions and you have a fire, what often happens is the heat will kill the growing needles and leaves. And what you'll have happen is a leaf drop is what we call it. And you can have a fire that is, completely black, if you will, or all the fuel has been burned, but then you'll have needle cast happen as those now dead needles are shed. So that's what this picture illustrates. And these type of fires take a lot of resources and a lot of time to be able to hold in check, to keep them, contained within lines. Because if you will, the fuel conditions, it's like sprinkling fuel back on. So you got to always be on the lookout for reburn and very enhanced mop up. So quick statewide context again. This was last updated on the 1st of February. So this is the general look from January, from 1/1 to 1/31. These are fires that occurred in the state, within our jurisdiction. And you can see a lot of smaller fires, less than 10 acres. That's the light blue color. And then the larger fires from basically 10 acres to 100 acres. That's the green. And we had just a few. We've had 2 fires show up in January that were, in the 100 to 500 acre range. So again, the statewide context, you can see how things are generally slowing down during the summer and then slowly building as you get into November. I mean, if you look at that, the fire count and acreage doubles, basically between October and November. Things slow down again in December because that's when we have the shortest day length, cooler temperatures, less solar heating, and so forth. And then the building conditions, like we already talked about, February and March, and then going into April with that slight reduction on average. So for January preliminary data, we are about double the acreage as compared to the 10-year average. And one of the larger fires we had, again, this was the report ending on the 1st of February, 169 acre fire in Columbus County in our District 8. So now let's take a look at current conditions. Where do we stand? What does it look like? So the 14-day precip stats. As you can see over here, over the past 14 days or 2 weeks, we've had significant improvement in drought and conditions, reservoir levels, and so forth in the western part of the state. I mean, there are weather stations that are easily above 4 inches, but east of Raleigh, we're looking at conditions, where we've basically had no significant, wetting rain event for upwards of 2 to 3 weeks, if not a little bit longer. So, that has less, it's less problematic in the wintertime when we're, in dormant conditions, but the fine fuels, the smaller fuels can dry out and, and be more conducive to fire this time of year. Now, the last 7-day precip, you can see over the last 7 days, this is just a sort of a image, a map image of the rainfall we've had. So I wanted to point that out. We may have had some rain, we may have had drizzle or whatnot, but, it's easy to say, oh, well, it rained out, everything's great. Well, you got to take it in context. Did the rain actually make it through the canopy of the trees? Did anything actually get absorbed by the ground, by the duff, the tree litter? and so forth. I also wanted to point out the seasonal snow totals so far. Last year you could almost consider it like a snow drought. I think I've heard it expressed as that. And this year, this is the snowfall we've seen so far. And it's been beneficial in our mountain districts, mountain counties, especially the higher elevation stuff, with a west aspect, several inches of snow, and it's helped compact things, and help with that fuel compacting. Because like with fuels, you have to end up reducing the airspace to really significantly impact, how those fuels respond to fire. If you remove the air from it, the intensity is significantly reduced. Snow is very helpful with doing that. Also wanted to point out the 7-day average stream flow that we've seen up through December. And as we started getting more rain, we saw all these USGS stream gauges and partner gauges really go up and show the percentiles well above normal to normal. And now, because of that the rainfall deficit we're starting to see, at least short term, you see these reds and darker reds show up, which is below normal for 7-day flows. But I want to throw this out there to you that, at the 30-day time scale, yes, we are under sort of a deficit, if you will, for our coastal plain areas. But when you put it in context of, 60 and 90-day, we're much closer to normal. And the SPI, or the standardized precip index, that's another way to look at data. And really at the 30-day time scale, really the area of most concern, if you want to call it that, would be Roanoke Island area and portions of the Outer Banks there. You see my highlighter. But again, you got to put everything in context with time of year, fuel conditions, previous rainfall and whatnot. But SPI is a way to relate it at various time scales. So you can compare sort of apples to apples.
Hey, Jamie.
Yeah.
We had a quick question come through on the chat from Annie Dance. She noted that it was hard to see on her phone and was asking if you could go back and audibly say the snow totals.
Go back. Okay, so I don't have the snow totals for specific points, but with the slide that I've got here, if you can see Asheville, it had 1.4 inches recorded. But, I can circle back to that later after the call and get some better information.
Thanks, Jamie. And Annie, if you could elaborate on your question, if you had a particular interest in knowing about the snow totals, we can go further into that if needed. Thanks, Jamie. Go ahead and go forward.
Okay, all right. Again, just sort of painting a picture of soil dryness. This is a NASA product that a lot of people use, be it climatology, natural resource folks and whatnot. But you can see basically from 0 to 40 centimeters, or about a foot down, the coastal plain is definitely showing some dryness, but it's less pronounced definitely as you get deeper. So if you think of a model that's predicting dryness from 0 to about 6.5 feet down, that's what this slide's showing. So very, very significant improvement in the mountain areas and basically everything west of Raleigh. And just the differences by week, by 2 week, 1 month difference, and then 1 year difference in the column moistures. Keach Byram Drought Index, that's another thing that we look at very closely. It's sort of a reference scale for estimating dryness of the soil and duff, basically from 0 to 8 inches down, and it's on a scale of 0 to 800. The higher the number, the more significant dryness there is. And it uses such things as air temperature, amount of rainfall in a day, and whatnot. And it's part of a model system. And right now we're fairly close to normal, after the reasonable rain we got in December and early January. You can see the higher numbers there in our District 8 area. An example of using our fire danger rating areas. You don't have to understand so much what these slides show is just, I want to point out that what goes into the background, to sort of calculate, well, what is the fire danger? How do things look now compared to last year, or, the 15-year time period that we're examining here in these slides. So there's a lot that goes on in the background to look at fire danger, adjective ratings is, what's Smokey Bear's arm saying? Is it a low day or is it an extreme day? And then it helps us to determine our preparedness levels and staffing levels. Not only the North Carolina Forest Service, but our cooperators as well. The drought update, wanted to show that real quick. We did touch on that. This was last released on the 1st, and there's going to be a meeting. There's meetings on Tuesdays, and then they release the updates on Thursdays. So this upcoming Thursday, there'll be a release. And you see that we had that rapid onset drought or flash drought, if you will, that showed up this fall. And then we also had the subsequent rapid class improvement. We had better than 3 to 4 class improvement in those driest areas of the mountains most recently. And this is more of a regional context that shows what's still going on. I mean, they've had significant rain in Louisiana and Mississippi and Alabama and parts of Tennessee, but their drought was so significant, it's taken a lot more to pull them out of, what the U.S. Drought Monitor looks at. And so the Drought Monitor is looking at physical data at multiple time scales, is looking at, drought impacts from different, say it from agriculture, forestry, water resources, that type of thing. And then there's also feedback that goes into it from subject matter experts as well. So, the U.S. Drought Monitor has a process to be able to determine, those categories of drought. El Nino, just quickly talk about that. I'm not going to read all this stuff, but we've had basically 3 years of La Nina, and we transitioned into El Nino officially from, what the climate folks have said. And really, they're looking now to transition back to sort of ENSO neutral, more than likely, going into the summer. So what is El Nino's typical impacts? Well, it opens up the water, if you will. I'm not a meteorologist, don't pretend to be one, but with the troughing and whatnot and the jet stream, we have better opportunity to get more moisture during the winter, typically. And then it's typically a little bit drier in the west of the Appalachians, going up into Kentucky and those points. So that's, typical, but there's nothing, I mean, you try to average something out, typical is not typical. So, looking at what El Nino has given us over the past, cycles, these are some of the years that the State Climate Office put together, 57, 58, and then the whole way through 2015 to 16. So you can see when you blend all these together, generally what you see is, enhanced precipitation during the winter, for North Carolina and a lot of the Southeast, again, going back with that troughing and the coastal lows and so forth that typically, go up. And especially like right now, Louisiana, you've seen a lot of flooding and so forth there. And that ties in, fairly well with these El Nino averages. But again, every year is different. And when you blend them together, it takes out some of those extremes one way or another. Quickly going through this. The month, this is again from past moderate to strong El Nino winters. December, January, and February, that's the winter as you categorize it. So 9 out of the 12 El Ninos have been wetter than average, and then 5 out of those 12 have been cooler than average. Now things start to fall off a bit when you get into March. For March, only 5 of 12 have been wetter than average, and then 5 of 12 cooler than average. So I want to point that out that, as we leave winter and go more towards summer, local weather patterns tend to influence us more. The short range outlook, shows from the State Climate Office, they put this out for us. Definitely recommend y'all go to the Climate Office website and take a look. It's very handy. Pretty good confidence going in, the February 8th to the 14th, the rain tracks possibly warmer. And then the uncertainty farther out in the forecast period. So this is handy, especially for prescribed fire practitioners and other folks. The Climate Prediction Center outlooks 6 to 10 days, all the way through to sort of a seasonal context of February through April. So you can see that early on, warmer than average is favored for 6 to 10 days, and then it's leaning a little bit above normal for precip. Again, it's sort of that El Nino pattern that we were talking about earlier. And then at 8 to 14 days, it looks trending cooler and potentially a little bit drier, leaning below average precip. And then the week 3 to 4, again, you can sort of see that El Nino pattern there pretty strongly again, especially for Florida and Louisiana and so forth. And seasonally, they're still favoring, slightly above normal precip, in the context of that. But when you drill it down to local scale, you have to take that with a grain of salt. Significant wildland fire potential outlook. This is something that's put out by the National Interagency Fire Center, or NIFC, Predictive Services, that take input from all the other geographic areas, including the map that I showed earlier where we're in the southern area. So for significant fire potential, significant being like large organization, extended attack type fires, for now, they're saying that there's a below normal likelihood for significant fire potential for February and March, and then that transitions down into April. But again, that's not talking about initial attack fires or anything like that. Initial attack fire activity is based on short-term weather factors. A few days of very warm conditions, dry weather, you can see a lot of initial attack activity that, it makes a very busy situation. And then going back to normal as we get into May. Now, relating to snowpack and whatnot near the Great Lakes states, they're definitely expecting above normal activity up that way. So just in closing, expect to see fire activity in acres typically increase when we go through February and March and into April towards summer. You have all those factors of the fire environment, this building, in the background there. We'll probably see those wide swings in temperatures, where we could have maybe another outbreak of 70, almost 80-degree days, and think about what that's doing to the plant physiology. And then what about when we get the frost and freeze damage back? And, that can set us back a bit for, what greenness does for us for wildfire. The last few weeks have turned out to be drier for the coastal areas. But again, at that longer time scale, we're still generally looking okay, but it's being closely monitored. If things do continue to dry out, we get into the growing season without a surplus of water, it would definitely, in all likelihood, enhance fire activity. El Nino influences typically decrease going into spring, and there's a lot of uncertainty going forward, into summer and fall. Summers are typical, like lightning fire season, if you will, if it aligns with drought, especially in the coastal plain. Two of the speakers after me will all three really work in the coastal plain area and deal with these organic and smoldering fires. And again, the significant wildfire outlook map is talking about large fire organization type fires, not initial attack. Anyway, thanks for your time, and I appreciate everybody.
All right, thank you, Jamie, for that very interesting presentation. Hold your slides up for just a second, if you will. We're going to go back and address Annie's conversation, but I did just want to mention that it's easy to see that there is a trend with the number of fires that there are in the state, depending on the time of year and throughout the state. It's also interesting to see how weather and the time of year is a very key element for fire intensity, the size of the fire, and fire behavior, which we'll explore a little bit in just a bit. But going back to Annie's conversation about the snow, the question was she was particularly interested in the Lake Lure area of Rutherford County and the snow totals there and impacts as it relates to the moisture that they receive and assisting with fire.
Okay, yeah, and I don't have that handy to be able to pull right now, but in general with snowpack, the longer the snow's on the ground, you basically got 99% relative humidity, if you will. So it's helping not only recharge those small fuels, what we would consider like 1 hour time lag fuels, it's also helping recharge the very large fuels, the log size stuff, firewood size stuff. So, the more snow and then the more duration that the snow is on the ground, it, significantly helps the fuel situation.
Thanks for that, Jamie. She did note that Annie is going to email you whenever she gets a chance and further explore that. I also wanted to make note that there are some links that have been put into the chat from our moderators, the National Fire Danger Rating System, as well as the NC Climate Office and the National Wildfire Potential Outlook. So feel free to take a look at those links when you get a chance in our chat. And we'll go ahead and press forward. So Jamie, if you'll stop sharing your screen, we'll bring up our series of presenters. So we do have coming up 3 stories from the Fireline, from 3 separate fires that have happened in recent history. First up, we will have Michael Good. Michael is the district forester for District 6 in North Carolina, headquartered in Fayetteville. He will be talking to us about fire weather and how it impacted firefighting efforts on the 2016 Party Rock fire in the Lake Lure area of Rutherford County in the mountains of North Carolina. So Annie, your question was perfect timing there. Michael was assigned as an operations section chief to the Party Rock fire. And Michael, if you'll take it away and first tell us a little bit about what an operations section chief does on a wildfire assignment. Thank you.
Okay, will do. Thank you, Carrie, for having me here. Specifically looking at the operations chief function, what I was doing there was planning and coordinating the resource assignments to try to get the right resources in the right place at the right time. So that was kind of the big push there. So I'll share my screen and see if this will work. Okay, so again, Michael Good, District Forester. This going back to 2016, it's a little bit dated at this point, but I have a lot of information about this fire, so it was an easy one for me to refer to. The other thing that has come up where we were just hearing from Jamie about Poplar Drive and Collett Ridge fires, 2 of the ones that he mentioned. This past fall, I passed through both of those at one point or another, and there's some similarities to it. So we'll see if we can discuss some of that as we move through also. So this is a picture of the Party Rock fire from back in 16, because images are easy to throw out there, and it shows a lot of the sort of activity, the behavior of the fire. This was a pretty hot burning fire when it was going. So how does weather play into this? Some of the background, and it's kind of nice. Jamie and I did not time this together or pair this together, but it really works out well with his lead in, because a lot of this it flows right into this portion of the presentation. That we did have extended drought throughout Western North Carolina in the summer and fall leading up to that November. Obviously below average rainfall and high temperatures. As we look back into the summer of 16, the drought really set itself up pretty solid in the summer. So it wasn't just the flash drought over the course of a month or two. It really had established and set itself into kind of set us up into a tough situation going into November. So this Party Rock fire started on the 5th of November, and almost immediately we had to take a more of a defensive posture. That we had aircraft, we were using helicopters to drop water. We had bulldozers on the ground putting in Fireline. And because of the length of the drought or the intensity of the drought, the lines weren't holding. Dropping water with the helicopter was not being super effective. So almost immediately, this was a defensive fight that we had to put out, protecting the structures and just trying to steer it and control it where we could. We call it point protection, where we really set up to protect the homes and kind of steer it where we can. So we had an incident management team that was requested on the 8th. That was where I was part of. That's where I was the ops chief on that team. So we rolled in on the 8th and took command of the fire and started expanding what we could do with it, the resources and the management of that. Just for note, this didn't have any impact at all on what was burning in Western North Carolina, but Hurricane Matthew had hit the North Carolina coast on the 8th of October. So 1 month prior, literally the coast of North Carolina was underwater and the mountains were in a very noticeable drought. So what are the drought effects? Jamie started talking a little more about this right at the close of his presentation, but where he was talking about the different fuel classes. Fuels dry at different rates. So pine needles and leaves and very small fuels dry pretty quickly. We refer to them as 1 hour fuels, where essentially within an hour, the fuel, the moisture in that fuel can change enough to make it available to burn or not available to burn, where the large fuels are much slower to do that. So a lot of times we'll share with our, as we're trying to get some of our newer folks tracking on how the fuel classes work. And we try to throw some times with them. So, 1 hour kind of speaks for itself. But if we're really looking at how much the fuel moisture can change in the fuels, you need 1 hour to address it in the fine fuels. 10 hours basically is the heating part of the day. So in a day, the fuel moistures can change. Next class is 100-hour fuels. That really is about a week. And the 1,000-hour fuels is about a month. So that's just kind of a simple way that we try to think about how long does it take for these fuels to dry out or recover from drought. So the fact that the drought had been going on for some time meant that all of the classes were available for burning. They were all listed at historic levels of dryness. The fuel classes were. So that made them all available to burn. They had not all been at the maximum peak, or it's actually a minimum of dryness, but they were all available to burn. So the fires burned very hot, very intensely. It's kind of like a campfire. You start with the pine straw and the needles and the small sticks to get it burning, but you really aren't getting a lot of heat coming off of that fire until the large fuels are burning. So when the woods would catch fire and the small fuels and then everything up to the large fuels were burning, that is the heat that we were dealing with that was coming off of this. That amount of radiation, radiant heat that was coming off also affected why some of the dozer lines were not effective at stopping this fire. So November 10th, one of our first days after we got there, the forecast was 64 degrees. humidity at 26%, the winds blowing out of the northwest at 5 to 7 miles per hour. So none of them are truly critical numbers in the fire weather area. But what was impacting us was the relative humidity recovery was only about 70% the previous night, and only expected to be about 50% that coming night, the morning going into the 11th. So much like Jamie was saying, that when snow is laying on top of fuels, it is an easy time for that moisture to get back into the fuels. Not having the humidity recovery at night meant there was no dew on the ground. We were never getting a chance to get moisture back into the fuels, even overnight. So the what we were seeing was the fire was not just burning during the peak of the day, but it was actually burning through the night. So most of the time when a fire burns, it tends to decrease in intensity when the sun goes down, the temperature goes down, the humidity goes back up, and you see the fire behavior decrease, and that wasn't happening. So the fire was continuing to burn through the night, through the morning. It really wasn't taking a break at all during the day. There's a map there that the fire was currently at 435 acres at this point. And if you can see the map, the east side of it had, and the south side was already burned out to roads. So they were a pretty good place for us to hold it. But the rest of the fire was deep up on the mountain. So making it a little more difficult to get to. So the dozer lines I already mentioned were pretty ineffective at stopping the fire. We had some very steep slopes. So even if the dozer lines were working, there were a lot of places we just couldn't put that kind of equipment. We did try some dozer lines on the ridge tops, but that was just not working. They weren't holding either. The only place that dozer lines seemed to be holding were at the bottom of slopes, and pretty much there were already road systems there, so the dozers weren't hugely necessary. Another thing that contributed to, I mentioned it was burning at night, but also in the dark and the steep slopes, it's really not safe to engage a fire. So we had to be very less aggressive during the night. As with any other drought and fire situation, our forestry resources were very limited. So we didn't have a lot of our engines that we could put on some of the dirt back roads and small roads for access. And structure fires, fire resources, the typical red fire engines were available. But if you've ever seen one of them drive off of a paved road, they don't go very far before they hit problems. So that all really led to a tactical change for us. We decided to back off to the road systems, where we did eventually have roads somewhere around the fire. So it made us have to back off to work them to use as holding lines for that. There is a picture of the sort of slopes that we were dealing with. Certainly that is not somewhere that even experienced dozer operators want to go. Like I said, we tried some ridge tops and they just weren't able to hold. There is another picture, a little bit less intense than the initial one, but it does show how the fire is backing down the hills, trying to get in between all the different fuels and burning pretty significantly. So what happened over the next week after we settled in and we came up with that new plan? The temperatures ranged for the next 7 days between mid 50s and mid 70s. Again, nothing that is super critical there, but certainly it is good fire weather. So it was able to continue to burn. The minimum humidities each day ranged in the 25 to 30%, and that was pretty consistent. So we didn't have a lot of variation on the weather that we were dealing with. It was a lot of the same thing day after day. The unfortunate with that was it wasn't good news day after day. It was just the same thing. So the winds were mainly out of the north that week, northeast, northwest, or north, but the consistency stayed there. And again, winds were less than 10 miles an hour. So it was not tremendous fire runs at this point. But the fire did continue to grow between 500 and 1,500 acres each day. At this point, and there's an updated map from the 17th, so a week later, that the fire had come out to most of the roads. So we had it fairly well established at the roads, roads, driveways, yards, anywhere that we could make a decent stand. With the biggest gap that we didn't have containment on was the northeast corner of it. Kind of the eastern side of the northern piece. The fire was still in the woods and had not yet come out to where we could hold it at a road. At this point, the fire was about 6,700 acres. So that growth each day certainly contributed to larger numbers. So some more pictures of what that looked like. We were trying to burn right off of anywhere that we could make a solid stand. So this was a driveway that is pretty easy to hold. It's also relatively easy to access with trucks and water. We did have some, you can see the kudzu around this house. So certainly that is a pretty intense fire. So we were able to keep it away from the house. That was some of the benefit of having access to structure engines. Our forestry engines with about 200 gallons of water can do only so much, but having access to structure engines really helped to support it. We tied in very closely with the structure group and the forestry group and linked them in and were able to use them together. There were still times that we were using aircraft to try to slow the spread. This is retardant that was being dropped out of it. Retardant does exactly what it says. It slows down the spread of fire. It was not able to stop it and suppress it. But if we could slow it down from coming down the mountain, it gave us time to get more resources in place, which is certainly something that we had been working with. So here is what I had just mentioned. We combined the structure engines and forestry engines and then placed them at each house or each point where we could make the hold. So what our intent was, what our goal was, we were burning the brush off of these yards or driveways or roads to burn it back into the edge of the wildfire. But the engines would also help us contain the fire. And then we were able to use them to mop up the remaining heat almost instantly. Because they were there, we did the burning. Then we could put the water right on it and then essentially leapfrog that unit down the road to the next house where we needed to go to. This is this front ridge that you see right on the lake was not part of the fire, but behind that front ridge, there was the road that was our fire edge going up the mountain that you can see there in the background. So that was how we spent that next week. But then, since we're talking about weather now, we got the bad news of the weather. The fire had spread on us every day with normal weather, and then all of a sudden we got a change in the weather. So we had the winds coming from the north, and now we were starting to see it circling around and coming out of the southwest. That really is our prevailing wind direction in North Carolina. So it was not uncommon to see the southwest wind. But if you remember that map before, it was that northeast corner that we still had, that we were still working with. So when we got this information, we really had to reevaluate our ability to hold it. If this wind comes through and pushes, you see on the Friday the 18th, it was starting to increase. And then the 19th and 20th, that weekend, is really when we were looking at sustained winds at 20 to 25. That's significant wind. And so we had to evaluate and really shift our plan, that we were still trying to do the burn and hold it on the roads. But we had to come up with a lot of contingencies, placing additional resources in place, because if the fire started to spread with a wind-driven fire, we would not be able to catch that from the back, that it would spread faster than we could catch up to it. So we had to put resources out in front just to try to evaluate what happens if these winds hit and it does cross one of our fire lines. We knew at that point that we were really just looking at the difficult wind through the weekend. So that really was what we had based things on. So we got our resources in place. We staffed up fairly heavily for the weekend, figuring if we could get till Monday, then we would be able to reevaluate and determine what has to happen next. So it worked for us. And by the end of the weekend, the fire was to the roads on the northeast corner. It certainly didn't take a whole lot of time to get it there with the winds pushing that way, but we did end up getting the fire out to the road. So that was where our final perimeter was. Just trying to, we kept updating the weather as we moved through, and that was our final footprint of the fire. At that point, I believe it was about 7,200 acres, if I remember right, and contained on a road system of some sort. So the effect, this is essentially the same view of the fires from the beginning of it, and there was a lot of question about what the effect was of the fire. So looking back, we're at the end of the the 2-week, 3-week burn window there, and everything has turned brown. But it was also November, so everything was already starting to turn. And I've been back since then, and really it did not have a tremendously negative effect on the vegetation there. So the state park, this was all in Chimney Rock State Park. The state park folks were pretty pleased with the suppression efforts and the fact that their forest was still in good shape. So my last slide is a sunset, because it's always a good way to end things with a sunset. But that is where I will end. So thank you for your time.
Michael, thank you very much. As you're going ahead and stop and share on your screen, we'll go ahead and get John queued up. We did have some good questions coming through on the chat, but we'll reserve those till the very end for our Q&A portion, but we will definitely make sure we cover those and for the right fire and get you to the right person as needed. So next up, we have our dear friend John Cook. He is the district forester for District 13 out of Fairfield and Hyde County. John was the initial attack incident commander on the last resort fire in Tyrrell County in 2023. Once the state incident management team was deployed to the incident, John remained on as one of the incident commanders for that team. Weather played a big role in how firefighting tactics were used for controlling and containing this fire. So John, if you will, start with what your role was as an initial attack incident commander on the fire and what that entailed, and go from there for us. Thank you.
All right. Yeah, so I was the actually one of the first ones on scene when the call went out. And oops. What video? Am I good here to go on or not?
Yep, you're good. Go ahead. Sorry, John.
Sorry, something popped up on my screen. So yep, so I'm the district forester here in District 13, and we had this is the last resort fire, which is in Tyrrell County, and I was the initial attack IC, which is unusual because usually I don't get there till a little bit later, but I was close by when the fire started. Make sure I can advance my slide here. There we go. So it started, get this off my screen here. March 23rd, about 11:30, before lunch. Then we're located about 1.5 miles east of Phelps Lake. It was an escape burn from a landowner who was deciding to burn off a field that day. Ended up being about 5,200 acres with extensive organic soils. If you're not sure what organic soils are, they are dirt that burns. It's not sand, not clay. It is organic material that's built up over years, and when it dries out, it burns just like peat or almost like a charcoal or something like that. So it's very difficult to actually put out once the ground catches on fire, and that's something that very unusual and unique to Eastern North Carolina. You find it also in Alaska and parts of like the Wisconsin and areas like that, Minnesota. So it took over 5 weeks to completely put this out. Required pumping water from Phelps Lake and well over $3 million to get it done. So where is this, right? The little flame out there over in this area, that's Lake Phelps right there, the blue dot, the blue circle. And there's where the fire approximately is. So pretty east of Raleigh on what this whole thing here is called the Albemarle Peninsula, between the two sounds, the Albemarle and the Pamlico. So this entire thing here is actually considered wetland. Very flat, a lot of farmland, but a lot of large blocks of timber and land. Refuges, a lot of this darker green you see here is a lot of refuge, Alligator Wildlife Refuge, Pocosin Lakes Wildlife Refuge, Manasquite Refuge, and then some of the lighter green is going to be a lot of the farmland. So you can see it's farmland and then a lot of big blocks of flat woodland. So here's what the final map looked like. This is Lake Phelps here on the side where it says Division A. That's Lake Phelps, and this is what the fire ended up looking like when it was all said and done. And the fire originated here in this little spot here, and we'll kind of run you through the sort of the timeline of the day and all the fun that ensued. So if you look at the day, we start out every morning looking at our weather forecast, and right off the bat, a few things kind of jump out at you, or should. This was for that morning. They put this out at 3 in the morning, and right off the bat says stout winds over forecast area, southwesterly 10 to 15, gusts up to 25 to 30. Well, that for us, and you've heard some of the weather, is a pretty good fire situation because of a lot of wind. And then something else that kind of hit you, you'll pick up later on, is that there was an abrupt wind shift to the northeast at 10 knots later in the day. So we got really gusty winds out of the southwest, and then at some point it changes to the northeast. Remember to mute your phone when you're on a thing. Look more into the weather here and what the day brings. So this is still March, but like Jamie and Mike had talked about earlier, 85 degrees, 40% humidity. That's a good fire day for Eastern North Carolina. It's dry air and warm temperatures, sunny and very windy. And then if you look at some of these other numbers here, transport winds are winds up in the atmosphere. So the winds up above where the clouds are and all are moving pretty strong. And the ventilation rate is a combination of some numbers that tell you how far up the smoke's going to go into the air. Instead of it sitting low, it's going to make a big column and go up. And that's another indicator of a good burn day. So 135,000 is we call it a Cat 5 day, which is a very, very good burning day. And that's the day this Mr. Farmer decided to burn. If you look at some of the situation before when the fire occurred, we had about less than 25% normal rain over the last month. And the fire is going to be where this number 7, this blue arrow right here, the fire is right about in this area right here. So we were experiencing just a rainfall deficit over the last month and only gotten a portion of what we normally get rainfall wise. So it was crispy on top and pretty dry. Here's the weather station that I was showing you. So we had really good weather data close by. This is on Pocosin Lakes National Refuge. Here's all the refuge right here. And that's our origin of our fire was. There's Phelps Lake, and this is State Park right here. And we're between the Terrell County, Washington County line. And we look down at some of the other weather data that day. 82 degrees, winds blowing, high solar radiation, dew point was 59, humidity 46, winds gusting to 16. Over the last 60 days, we only had 5 inches of rain over 2 months. So that's not a lot for this time of year. And some of the fire danger ratings we had, the 1 hour fuels were 14, which is pretty low, as well as 100 hour fuels at 18. And some of our indices. So March 24th, you can see our burning index was above average, somewhere in this 100 and 125 range, and our spread component was elevated as well. So 11:30, we get the phone call that our farmer decided down here in this little field that he wanted to burn something. And the county ranger had told him earlier in the day, he said, bud, I know you got a permit, but I really don't think it's a good idea today to burn. And our farmer fella said, well, I got a really good disc line about 2 discs wide around this, and it's just some grass. So it really shouldn't be a problem. I think I'll be all right. The county ranger said, I really wish you waited today, to do it. And so our fella said, well, I'm going to give it a shot. So there's our little red dot right here, about where he started. So that's at 11:30. Oops. And then at about 12:17, about 30 minutes later, here's what he's got. And I took this picture of my truck on the way to the fire because I said I was really close nearby. I saw my county ranger go by the other direction on Highway 64 with his lights on. And I said, where are you going? He said, look to your right. And I was like, oh, look at that. So turned and headed that direction. So within 45 minutes of that guy lighting that fire, here's what we already saw on the horizon. By 12:30, we had a plane overhead from Weyerhaeuser. They were in the area. We share with Weyerhaeuser because they fly over their forest to make sure there's nothing going on. And if they see something, they'll help us out. So a real experienced pilot came over. And by 12:30, he said, well, you got about 20 acres, bud. And he said, it's running with the wind. The wind was coming in that southwest direction. And he said, it's really making a push, and it's going to get really close to that first road there is Tennessee Road, that first road. So we're still on private property. This big chunk over here is refuge, and everything down here is U.S. Fish and Wildlife Refuge. So it's already 20 acres. And the next few minutes, this is looking down Tennessee Road, and this is him talking about it's probably going to cross over that road. 10 minutes later, yeah, It's across the road. It's over there. It's moving. This road didn't stop it. It jumps right over. Smoke's getting real black, real thick. It's burning really hot. I got people coming, resources coming, but they're still far away. By 1300, it's about 100 acres. Crossed over Tennessee Road and made a big push into this next block, also still on private property, and it expanded some more. Plain was telling me it's definitely getting bigger, and we got more resources coming, and it's just wind driven at that point. There's not a lot we can do about it except sort of plan ahead and get more people coming to try and make a plan. So by 1330, 1:30 in the afternoon, it's crossed Tennessee Road, and then it also crossed J Canal onto the refuge. So within 2 hours of that fellow lighting that thing, the fire had gone to about 250 acres. This is J Canal Road, which is this is where it crosses over to federal fish and wildlife property. So this is essentially, how much in just 2 hours we've gone from basically 0 to 250 acres. And to put that in perspective, it spread over a mile in 2 hours. So that's, half a mile an hour. It may sound like that's really slow if you're just walking down the street, but imagine this thing growing and getting bigger, and it's just churning and growing at a half mile an hour. And in 2 hours, we've gone a mile and we're at 250 acres. When we're going to be in 4, 5, 6 more hours, right? So 1427, it's crossed Sproul Road and Biddix Road and moving across the north end of the refuge. And everybody's seeing that column from a long way away. So I'm calling for all the help I can get. This here is a picture of our planes that come out of Kenansville down to Duplin County, and they all are heading over here. There's our fire, and they're dropping like as hard as they can, and they're reloading over here in Eatonton, and then they're back and forth. So I think I'd ordered up 8 tractors, engine strike teams, planes, helicopters, anything I can get my hands on. Fish and Wildlife had equipment coming to us, so we're bringing everybody we can. By 2:30, this is that Biddix Road and Sproul Road I was talking about. It's still going up private, and it's making a big push up into all the part of the refuge. So again, we barely had time. It takes 45 minutes to an hour for a tractor to get across the district. So I mean, they're barely getting into place at this point. And our hope is that we can maybe try to shore up this bottom end and maybe keep it from spreading to the south, and maybe, try and keep it from spreading too much more of these fields. At this point, it's dropping fire out into these fields. And although fields usually are your friends when it's organic material and it hasn't been planted yet because it's March, there was a lot of stubble, and it's starting to go out and just cross over these fields. So the engines that were showing up were out here putting fires out way out ahead of the main fire, where it was dropping spots out in these fields and starting to burn through the grass and then keep on moving. And then more to the east is more blocks of timber out over here. So by about 6 o'clock, 1800, it's about 1,700 acres. Big, huge column set up. This is looking from the origin of the fire, meaning this is the type of grass the landowner was trying to burn. It was somewhere over in here where it got out. And that's the fire from looking from the south end, looking north as that smoke's jumping up and then hitting that transport winds we talked about up ahead, where it goes up and starts to shear off and head to the northeast. So it's pretty much consumed all this private land. It's pushed really hard into here. It's 6 o'clock at night. We're probably close to 2,000 acres. Working these fields, try to contain it. We know that the major brush and timber is going to run out when it hits some of these fields, but I got all this down here to worry about. And if you remember, what did that forecast call for later tonight? Winds abruptly turn northeast. So this whole thing is going to turn the other direction. So as far as the wind, you've got to pay attention to that weather, and we got to plan accordingly. And I can't be focused on where it's going right now. I got to think about where it's going to be going 3, 4, 5 hours from now. And that's where we make the rest of our plan. So knowing that the fire is going to turn and head back on us, we start going down J Canal Road, which is that main road that ran north-south between the refuge and the private property. and we start firing it off, meaning we're taking devices and we're shooting things across this ditch. There's a big ditch here. You could put 3 cars in, and there's a road right here. And then there's trees on the other side, and we're shooting things across the ditch to light this off. The wind is still coming out of the southwest, which is why this is still blowing the direction we want it to go. It's blowing away from our road. And we're working our way down J Canal to try and take the winds to our advantage and get this thing cut off before the winds shift. By 1940, we still have southwest winds, and we're making good progress going down the J Canal, getting to the Harvester Road, which is on the south end, where we hope we can kind of wrap this thing in. So here we are. Look at us. We're making good progress. We're coming down here. We're lighting this off because we know that this fire out here is uncontained. When the winds start coming out of the northeast, it's going to push all this fire back into the refuge, which is what we don't want. We're around 2,800 acres, I think. I don't know. It's getting late. It's dark. The planes are gone. We're just out here trying to get this lit off. The guys are on the other side, still trying to contain over here because the winds are still sort of southwest. So everything we're lighting is blowing their direction. They're trying to hold it in and make sure it doesn't turn this corner here. And so we're a lot of guesswork, but that's our plan. And here's the wind shift, 2,200 northeast at 5, gusting to 12. And you can see there's our weather station. The wind speed was 5, gusting to 12, northeast at 59 degrees. So still pretty warm. That's that block of wood. So the wind's now appearance done at 180 on us. So all day long, it's going one direction. And now wind shift is turning and going the other. The absolute worst scenario that you would want with a fire is inconsistency with the wind, because you can't make a good plan and stick with it. It's going to keep changing on you. So at this point, this is the road. There's a ditch that goes off of J Canal Road into the block. And here's the fire coming back towards us. I'm going to try this video and see if it works for y'all. So you can see all the flames, the embers now are starting to come back towards me at the road with the wind shift.
Crap,
Oh, you might have heard that. Sorry. But anyway, it gives you an idea that what was going one direction is now starting to, all these embers up in the air starting to come back across our road, and it's pushing the opposite direction back towards us, which is opposite what we wanted. So about 22:15, the winds caused the fire to jump across J Canal Road, which is the road right here. We had hoped to go down here and turn Harvester and box the whole thing in, but we couldn't make it down there fast enough. We could only go so fast to get it lit. And when those winds came through, it really changed everything, and they made this jump and push across. So then our next goal, you go to the next block, and we tried to light it off Harvester, but it was getting too late at night. And we weren't able to do much with it at that point. Kind of all the weather had sort of changed. The winds had slowed down a little bit. The humidity comes up, and trying to light things and light this road off to get fire in front of the fire wasn't successful. So at that point, we had to kind of wait and come back in the morning with the plan that we were going to, when the weather got drier in the morning, light off Ichabod Road and Harvester Road and burn this block out, which was entirely on the refuge property. And that was the next plan. This is kind of what the fire looked like the next day from the helicopter looking down from above, and I'll orient you a little bit. The fire started kind of off the picture over here on the left, and this is where it ran with the wind that day, with those southwest winds. It ran this way. Here's that J Canal Road running north and south. It ran all the way up this way, hit those fields out there. You can kind of see the fields are up this direction. And then here's where the fire kind of started going south on us when the winds changed. Some of this is where we lit it and the winds were in our favor, but then it crossed over into the Ichabod block over here. And that's sort of the scorched earth that we were left with after about a day and a half. The final map, it never really wanted to burn down this bottom corner, so that sort of stayed wet. But here again, that origin of the fire was somewhere right in here. Ran all the way this way, came down this way, ran that way, and then here's the block we ended up burning out. So it was a real big, fast event. It got to this final size within like 2 days, and luckily didn't get much bigger. The rest of it was just mopping up with the ground fire. Had several impacts from the fire that were unusual. We had a lot of smoke impacts. US 64 that runs east-west from Raleigh to the Outer Banks. This was US 64. I was going into the fire at 6:50 in the morning, and here's the smoke coming off the fire, just laying across the highway. So that's really bad conditions for everybody around the area. You know, school's still in session. The smoke was all over. We had a couple of what are called super fog events where people actually got a little fender bender because there was zero visibility. This is actually still good visibility, but you can get down to where there's almost like literally none. And there was a couple of fender benders on some smaller roads. Nobody was injured, just some bumpers. 250 miles away to the north, in Washington, D.C., they were smelling our smoke. I actually worked with a few people that have offices in the U.S. with the U.S. Forest Service in D.C., and they were texting me going, "What are you doing down there?" And they said, "It smells like smoke up here in Washington." I was like, "Yeah, sorry, that's me. We'll have it done in a few weeks." But it gives you an idea of the impact that our fires and our smoke can have. The footprint of our smoke is way larger than just the footprint of the fire, and it impacts people, you know, all over. And it's pretty. They thought it was so bad because what goes up, smoke goes up, and it's got to come down somewhere. And unless you're putting it out over the ocean, it's got to land. But it made it in about a day. It started hitting DC when all that smoke went up in the atmosphere, started to settle back down. And I'll leave you with another sage advice from a local person there that lived in the area that kind of summed up what we felt from the Forest Service is good advice that everyone should heed.
My advice for the people out there that are fighting it: stay safe. Don't make any mistakes. And for the people that are not fighting it, don't be burning stuff that don't need burning. My advice for the people out there that.
So I think that's my last slide there. Anyway.
All right. Thank you, John. We appreciate that. Yeah, certainly don't burn stuff that don't need burning. That's a sage advice for a lot of things in this part of the world. So thank you for that information. And next up, we have one final story from the Fireline. If you do have any questions for John Cook and the last resort fire and how weather played a role in that, please feel free to go ahead and throw that into the chat and just make a little note, Cook, at the end of your question, so that way we can direct it to the right person. All right, so as John is leaving us and dropping his presentation, go ahead and get yours up, Shane, for us to see. Last but certainly not least, we do have District Forester Shane Hardy out of District 8, based in Whiteville here in the southeast corner of the state. Shane was involved as initial attack IC incident commander for the Pulp Road fire in the Green Swamp of Brunswick County in June of last year. Like John on the last resort fire, Shane was also an initial attack incident commander on the scene in the initial onset of that fire, and then transitioned to a deputy incident commander role for the incident management team assigned to the fire. So Shane, tell us how weather played an integral role in the ultimate containment of Pulp Road fire.
Okay, can you see my screen, Carrie?
Yes, I can. Yep, good to go.
Okay, so hey, I'm Shane Hardy, District Forester down in D8, southeast corner of North Carolina. I'm the incident commander of the North Carolina Forest Service Red Team. I'm also an operations chief on a national team out of the Pacific Northwest, and sometimes fill in as an alternate IC on that team as well. But my day job here in District 8, the southeast corner, threw me into June 15th. So I want to talk about the first 3 days of Pulp Road fire as far as our involvement. The fire initially started 2 days prior as a prescribed fire. We won't go into that day or the day after. But to put into perspective kind of where Pulp Road is, if I can get my screen to work. All right, Carrie, there it is. All right, so we'll start out at the tail end of this thing. So this is what it looked like when it was finished, but to put into perspective, Pulp Road, the Nature Conservancy block, as we call it, is in Brunswick County, down in the southeastern corner of the Green Swamp. if you've ever heard of the Green Swamp. So all of this area to the north and to the west of the fire area, those are not fields. That is all pine plantation of different age structures, and it's commercial pine plantation that feeds our paper mills down here in southeastern North Carolina. The Green Swamp as a whole is about 260,000 acres of contiguous forest land and stretches across Columbus and Brunswick County. All right, so Thursday, June 15th, became aware of the fire about 8:30 that morning. Still classified as a prescribed fire at that point, and that's the first I had heard about it at that point. Because it was still being considered a prescribed fire, we couldn't take any action, and it was unclear to all those present as to whether the fire was just going to stop naturally. There is typically a very wet area in the conservancy to the west of that fire perimeter, and it has held many prescribed fires and wildfires in the past, including just the year prior. We had a fire that pushed into that wet area and went out. And so they were trying to evaluate if that was going to hold that western flank of the fire while they held the eastern flank on a road system there. So at 11:30, I got a call. They had been able to get up in the air, and they were looking at the smoke column and decided that it was indeed a wildfire. It's beyond the control of those that were responsible for the prescribed fire. And I was about an hour away at that point, and so began to drive toward that location and arrived at around 12:30. Now, in that initial call, the area supervisor went ahead and told me, he said, "Hey, boss, this one's beyond me." He said, it's already, the complexity it's going to give is beyond what my capability is. We're going to need a lot of resources, so I want you to come on in and take this over. So it was established early on that I would take over as the initial attack I see, and then make decisions about how the incident would evolve with management structure there going forward. So I got, while driving, I went ahead and dispatched 8 tractor plow units and numerous Fireline leadership positions, because I was anticipating that we would have to do a lot of burning because of being familiar with that area. And I would need some pretty savvy folks that could move quickly, be very nimble, and adjust on the fly to whatever the fire dictated. So I name requested quite a number of folks to start heading that way. The forecast, which I had already pulled up and looked at, we had some pretty gusty winds, southwest at 8, gusting to around 20 that day. One thing to note, Jamie Dunbar earlier talked a whole lot about fuel moisture. Well, we do look at fuel moisture quite a bit. However, here in southeastern North Carolina, our worst fires occur in live fuels. And so all those fuel moistures he was speaking about relate specifically to dead fuels. You'll notice that the humidity is very high, 51%, but it's very hot. And so in those live fuels that we have here in the southeastern part of the state and all along the coast, John Cook's fire he just spoke of is the same or very similar fuel type. All it really needs is temperature and wind, and we had that. And so those live fuels are going to burn very well once they have that direct sunlight with a high temperature shining down on them and a good strong wind to push it. They burn very well regardless of what that humidity is or how damp it might be underneath. Looking ahead, I went ahead and looked at what our winds would do in days to come, because this would dictate our actions, right? And how we went about controlling the fire. And so the winds were favorable, west, west, south. And I want you to remember that as we go forward, because that'll become a key component in how we adjusted our strategy for this fire. So day one, western flank. All of the pictures you're going to see, I don't credit anybody for them because I took them all, and they were taken from the helicopter at different times along the fire. And so this is what we observed on the western flank of the fire the first time we got up. And this doesn't look like much. Those little, the green things down there on your screen, they look like little short stubble sticking up. Those are actually fully grown trees. In the different size classes in there, anywhere from 30 to 40 feet, in some areas as high as 60 to 70 feet tall vegetation, and it's just a wall. of vegetation. It's pond pine wrapped up with vines that burn, wrapped up with shrubs that burn, and it's a complete fuel composition from the ground up. And so what we observed is this flanking crown fire that was just continuous along the fire's edge. And even though to the right of your screen, all you see is the smoke, that's because the smoke is obscuring the fire, but it's doing the same thing back there and then off your screen to the left. You can tell this is a very long distance that we're dealing with of well over a mile that you're looking at in that photograph, just for perspective. Fire was burning from the southwest to the northeast because we had those southwest wind flow. And so we knew that we were going to have to try to stop that northward spread. And although it was burning to the northeast, that western flank was really active, as you just saw. And up to the north of it is that Richardson Road. And that's that northern boundary of the Conservancy. Beyond that Richardson Road is just continuous commercial timberland, high value timber. And there was actually a logging operation going on at that time along that Richardson Road. Very early on, we had to evacuate the loggers and get them out of there. And we assumed burning operations from where the fire was impacting over on the east side and brought that fire around up to Richardson Road and began to progress to the west. What you're looking at in this photograph is as we brought that fire, so for orientation, Richardson Road is going to be on the left side of your screen. And that fire that you're looking at on the left side of the screen is the fire that we set along the road and then gave it depth with the helicopter. Over to the right half of your screen is the actual wildfire. And so what we're trying to do is build a black buffer along that Richardson Road and bring those fires together. But that made a V, if you will, up between those two fires, kind of an area of green that protruded up in there. In talking with the Conservancy, so it's important to understand that the Conservancy is kind of the last place that we have in my district, at least, that is basically untouched. It is natural. It hasn't been drained. It hasn't been ditched. There aren't roads in it. And for the most part, other than some old fire lines and things from years ago, they like to keep it that way. And we agree that we would like to keep it that way. So we do have a memorandum of agreement with them that we will attempt not to put in new lines in the Conservancy. And we will discuss our attack with them to try to come up with something that impacts the resource the least in that Conservancy, because it is such a pristine piece of ground. So what we came up with is that if we could burn all this to basically an even western flank, that we would try to construct later, once we got the fire lined up oriented north and south, we would then have a straight line of fire. We could put a line in from the north and from the south, making a western fire line that could be used in years to come for prescribed fire purposes. And that would be the least impactful to the Conservancy. And so you'll see that here, and this map will kind of show you what I was talking about. So this northern red line is going to be Richardson Road. This blue area, we did not burn on day one, but the red line just off to the right-hand side of that is what we burned on the first day, trying to orient it north and south, but at the same time, knowing that we may get some sea breeze the following day, we wanted to make sure that we kind of hooked our burnout operation to the west a little bit, so that if any of this fire to the south was impacted by sea breeze, we would have a bit of a catcher's mitt in case we had issues in getting out ahead of the thing the next day. So we burned quite a buffer off to the left, but we didn't bring that fire to square it up on day one. And then this is actually some internal stuff we don't normally show, but this is me doing a really rough map. This was done at 1 a.m. The following morning. and to show distances and acreages to my supervisor overnight so we could have discussions. He could see what I was seeing. And this isn't totally accurate, but it was really good with what we had to work with and where we thought the fire was at that time. So the blue shaded area was my proposal to him at that time. Based on the forecast you saw earlier of continuous southerly and westerly wind flow, the goal was to burn it out to this red line on the left side of that blue shaded area, and then try to put tractor plows in from the south and from the north, constructing as straight of a line as possible and isolate this fire to that eastern side of the conservancy, if you will. So the next morning, after we're already getting to the fire, the forecast started changing. And it's important for me to let you know that we do have an incident meteorologist that works out of the Wilmington office. He travels all over the world, actually. He's been to Australia, but also travels within the continental US to fires, and is a very good incident meteorologist, understands fire and understands our needs. And so I had woken him up a few times during the night, and we'd had some conversation. He gave me a heads up that he was looking at, instead of those west and southerly wind flows, that he was seeing that the winds may turn and come out of the east as we got closer to Sunday or Monday. And sure enough, the next morning, that shows up that we're getting a southeast wind projection starting to impact the fire area on Monday. So you can see at this point, Sunday is still southwest. However, Terry LeBeau, the incident meteorologist, had told me, he said, I would not hedge my bets on that southwest wind Sunday. He said, for planning purposes, I would plan that will be an easterly wind or a southeasterly wind, because that change that you're going to see in the forecast for Monday, Tuesday is probably going to come in a little sooner. We've just held off in putting it in the official forecast. Point being, it's now Thursday night or in the wee hours of Friday morning, and I have 2 more days before I get an easterly wind component. A little bit later that morning, they update the forecast. And sure enough, the east wind is forecasted for Sunday. And so that really puts us under the time scale of what we have to do. So we change our plan, and on Friday morning, met with the conservancy, talked to my supervisor over the phone, developed a plan, which would be a little bit unusual. It's like, okay, we're going to burn the whole thing out, all 15 to 16,000 acres of this place, because we tried to test the ability of our equipment to stand up in the where we plan to construct that western line, and failed the night before. As soon as he left the road, the soils were still too damp. We had good rains and there was moisture in the ground. However, the fuels above ground had dried out, but there was still moisture in the ground, and that prevented our equipment from being able to effectively stand up. Combine that with that easterly wind coming in, and we decided there was no effective way to control that fire, especially within the 2 days we had to work with traditional line construction. Therefore, it was, okay, we've got to move quickly and try to start putting a lot of fire on the ground and progress that fire in a westward direction. But we have to have the fire out to Highway 211 to the west by end of shift Saturday, before that wind shifts out of the easterly component. This is a picture taken very early in the day on Friday morning. That kind of shows you how things are going. That's what we saw when we got up in the air very quickly on Friday morning after lighting our first line of fire. And so now our plan's set. We know what time frame we have to work with. We know what has to be done. Now it's the challenge of getting it done. burning out at this point around 10,000 acres or more remaining in 2 days is a pretty phenomenal feat, especially when there's been no previous line construction or no previous planning. Now, we did benefit from the roads to the north and Highway 211 to the west. However, on the southerly end, it was not continuous road. So we had to go in and start tying roads together, and we had no resources down there at that point. So we reallocated a lot of resources down there, got the Conservancy people tied in to protect the sensitive areas and the culturally sensitive areas, so we wouldn't impact those. And then we progressed all along that southern corridor of line construction. And because of that, you will see that we could not advance fire on day 2 as fast on the southern end as we were able to on the north end. That honestly worked in our advantage as well, because we did get that sea breeze. And so this burning of angling off to the west faster on the northern end prevented any fire from trying to take a northward run from that sea breeze effect that occurred on Friday, because it essentially was all backing fire at that point. Around 1630, which is 4:30 that afternoon, this is kind of where we had made it to. The Richardson Road turns south and then comes down to another road down to the south, and we had tied it into that intersection. We're looking at quite a bit of acreage. Just the additional acreage burned that day so far was estimated to be around 6,400 acres. And then we continued to burn into the evening. We'll show you those totals a little later on. Here's some photographs of going into the 3rd day. And so the 3rd day, we had quite a bit left. And so we just had to put a lot of fire on the ground fast, knowing that if we didn't get all of this burned out by dark, we were going to be faced with a tremendous wall of fire coming back at Highway 211 on Sunday. And there are some houses on the west side of Highway 211. It's not all pine plantation on that southern end of the fire on the west side of 211. And so we'd be looking at around 3-mile wall of head fire coming back at us on Sunday if we failed. So we aggressively set fire on the ground as well as by air all day on Saturday. And this is kind of what you saw. We had smoke reports, smoke complaints, certainly from all through New Hanover County and Eastern Brunswick County, but no actual negative issues other than some visibility issues that occurred there, and a lot of people with a lot of ash in their yards, on their houses, that was very easily blown away by the wind and then washed away by the rain in days to come. Took this picture because at this point downwind of the fire, it actually got so dark that all of the street lights came on in the towns east of the fire. That's how dark and big that smoke column was. As we progress to the west side of the Conservancy along Highway 211, it's an area where they've been successful in doing a good bit of burning in the past. And I just wanted to show you this photograph. So this particular more open area had been burned a good bit in the past. And because of that, that fire intensity was very low as compared to the majority of the Conservancy, which had not had fire in it in around 70 years.
Shane, just to stop you for a quick second, folks that are still online with us, we are likely going to be going over our noon hour end time today. If you'd like to stay on, please feel free to do so. We still plan to have our Q&A towards the end, but if not, we do plan to have this webinar recorded and hosted on the Turnbull Creek Educational State Forest website. I do plan to send an email out to those that participated today with our post-webinar survey, and we'd love to get your feedback. And again, if you do need to drop off, we are reaching that noon hour, so please feel free to do so. But also, if you're able to stick around, we'd love to have you and continue the conversation. Thanks, Shane. Go ahead.
3 or 4 slides left. And so this is a progression map of Fulp Road, and it shows the burning that went on initially with the prescribed fire and then some attempts to stop that northern spread, but we'll focus on the 15th, 16th, and 17th. And so here's what we were able to do during that 3-day period to bring that fire successfully out to that western holding feature of Highway 211. To zoom in a little bit there on those dates, just so you can see that on your screens or on your iPads, iPhones. That's the color coordination that goes with that. And then here's the acres that were burned. So that first afternoon, arriving there at 12:30, we burned about 2,650 acres. We burned a little over 7,000 on Friday. And then on Saturday, we finished it with around 5,200 acres burned in that day. Here's some satellite imagery of the post-fire effects. I think this was done in August, if I remember correctly, and it's August 8th. And so this kind of shows the intensity, very intense fire throughout the majority of the conservancy. But as we move into the western part, where some prescribed fire has gone on in the past, those fire effects were much less severe. In addition, we did see on the western side, because this is such a large area, they had more precipitation, some thunderstorms and things that had impacted that area but didn't push across the entire conservancy, also affected those fuels and even those dead fuels that Jamie spoke about earlier. And that is the end of my show, Carrie. Questions?
All right, Shane, thank you very much. For all my presenters, if you will, go ahead and turn on your videos. We're going to go into our Q&A portion of the webinar here. We'll entertain questions through the meeting chat. So if you haven't already entered your question, please feel free to do so there. We'll have some moderators looking through that. But first, we want to go back and look at some of the questions that came through as we went along. The first one that I have up is from Matt Flores, and Shane started to answer this one, but I do want to circle back to that and just make sure that we covered everything. So Matt's question was, when is the best time to do prescribed burning to mitigate wildfires in these areas, or are prescribed burning not a common practice? And to that, Shane had started with December through February is the primary time for most. For advanced fire practitioners, some burning can be done 12 months of the year under very specific conditions to the stand. So Shane, would you like to add any more to that?
So most of our burning and what's our safest time to do prescribed fire is going to be that December, January, February time frame. Depending on the particular rainfall or the seasonality of that year, temperatures, et cetera, that can extend on into March a good many years. There is some benefit of doing growing season burns in the summer or late spring, but those should be left to professionals that have studied the art and understand the science for quite a while. And so I encourage anybody that's going to try to do their own, contact us. We'll go out, we'll write a burn plan for you. We'll give you some advice. We'll even give you a call when it's the right day to do it. And give you some guidance. There's also a certified burner class that we put on so that you can protect yourself from the impacts of liability of smoke. But I don't encourage most folks to go outside of those 3 months and put much fire on the ground.
All right, thanks, Shane. Next question came from Annie Dance, and this was a question specifically regarding the Party Rock fire, and Michael Good did start answering this one. Did kudzu help the fire not spread as quick, or did it act as fuel? It was mentioned that kudzu was one of the fuel types there, to which Michael Good noted kudzu burns quickly. Would you like to elaborate on that, Michael?
Yeah, it burns quickly. It also burns intensely. It creates a lot of heat. But our goal at that point, we were trying to burn the brush around the homes to be able to have a good hard black so the fire wouldn't come back across it. So it wasn't necessarily a good or a bad thing. It was just a change of fuels that we had to address.
Okay, thank you. And this next question is for John Cook in relation to the last resort fire. You had mentioned that the landowner that did the prescribed burning did have contact from the local Forest Service official, the county staff, and there was recommendation not to burn for the particular conditions that we had that time. Annie had mentioned what, if any, legislation would have helped the situation. You mentioned the farm owner had a permit, not familiar with the specifics, but she imagines that if a fire official said don't burn today, then their word would be final. John, if you want to go ahead and speak about that.
Right. So our permit system, and the term permit can be a little confusing, but the permit system is essentially meant to notify us that you plan on doing something, which in this instance it worked because then the ranger was notified and went out to talk to a landowner. A permit, though, by definition is like, it's not the same as like a building permit, like where everything's been approved and you're good to go. So we don't say yes or no to people. We ask them to notify us and then they move forward. They can be cited for not notifying us, but then they're also responsible if the fire gets out. So you have a permit to burn, but you don't have a permit to let it get out. So if it does get out or does escape your control, then we investigate what was the reasoning for that. Is it careless? Was it reckless? Was it accidental? And then we have laws in place to cite someone. So the permitting system, in a sense, it gave, it did let us notify the person. We didn't recommend they do it today, but there's nothing that we have, unless there's a burn ban in place, we can't stop people legally from doing an activity on their property. We can hold them, the consequences after the fact, but, in this case, that's just how the system works. Some states have a little bit of a different setup, but that's how North Carolina's is. And for the most part, it works really well. And it should have worked well for this fella. He just really thought he was in a better shape than he was. And we saw the outcome. So still held responsible, but the permit did work how it was supposed to.
All right, thanks, John. And we've got a second one for you, one that came through on a direct message to me. You had mentioned that you used shooting something across the ditch to start fire to contain what was already there. What did you shoot across the ditch and why? What was the purpose for that?
Right. So there's a lot of tools that we use in the wildland fire world. There's what Shane was using out of the helicopter, drops little balls that are delayed ignition, and they drop that out there in the middle of that big block to make that burn happen. We've got devices that work as well off of the truck or handheld. There's flares. There's several things that we can use to try and get that to, especially we have to shoot it across that ditch because you can't swim across in March and light the other side. It's not safe to be over there. So there's several different pyrotechnic devices that we use, but the one we mainly use was called the Green Dragon, and it's similar to what Shane was using in the helicopter. We launch it from the ground as opposed to being dropped from the air.
Okay, great. We've got a couple more questions. So if anybody has any other burning questions, feel free to drop them in the chat and we'll finish up here in just a few minutes. One other question that came in through direct was, what are some major differences between fighting fire in the mountains versus fighting fire in the coastal plain or other parts of the state? Since Michael Good talked about Party Rock Fire and in the mountains, if you will, go ahead and address that one for us.
There are a lot, I don't know that I can summarize them in a quick statement. Probably the biggest thing that we see is you get the wind driven effect in the flat ground. And it tends to come with the bigger weather systems, the winds blowing out of the southwest, winds blowing out of the north. In the mountains, you get a lot of the terrain effects of the wind. So it'll change directions on almost a micro scale, where you get eddies and valleys and things like that. So that, and then just the speed that fire runs uphill versus equipment that slows down going uphill. Those are probably the biggest two.
Very good. Another question from Annie coming in. What's the best practice for an average citizen to know when to burn and when not to burn? Who determines the burn ban? Shane, I'll give this one to you, please.
Okay, so I'll answer the last part of that first. The Commissioner of Agriculture is who determines when a burn ban is put in place. And certainly he takes feedback from folks like me and John and Michael Good on whether we need a burn ban in our district, but ultimately it's his decision and he is the only one that can put that burn ban in place. As far as how does a person know when a good time to burn is, that's what your local forest ranger is there for. And so I encourage you to, if you don't know your county forest ranger, for you to reach out, make contact with that person, and they can give you some really good advice on, come out, meet with you, look at your property, and then explain to you how to properly carry out that burn. Or if it's not something that you should do yourself, then they can also give you some prices on what it would cost for our agency to come and conduct that burn for you.
All right, thanks, Shane. And Annie did mention, just as a side note, that it was confusing for some folks in Western North Carolina last year, especially when some counties had burn bans issued and others weren't added till later. A lot of that plays into the commissioner looking at, the different parts of what's going on in that region, getting feedback from subject matter experts on what weather conditions are happening. Obviously, we don't want to put a burn ban in place unless it is absolutely necessary. We want to, keep that as open as possible. And so it just comes down to a game day decision, basically, when that takes place based on the feedback that the commissioner gets from all the entities that he utilizes for resource knowledge. We did include the statewide contacts link in the chat. So if you don't happen to know how to reach your local county ranger or county staff, that's a good source for that. And I believe we had one other question that I'm actually going to have all three of you entertain, and that was in regards to careers. So if people are interested in careers like yours, what do they need to do to get there? There's a lot of different answers, so I'm looking forward to hearing from all three of you.
You want to go first, Karen?
Well, go ahead and go, Shane. You're good. Open mic.
Okay, so myself and John and Michael Good are all three foresters. We have 4-year degrees from a SAF accredited institution. John has a master's degree. He went that little extra step there and got a master's degree in forestry. So I went to Clemson. John went to Rutgers and State, and Michael Good went to State, if I recall correctly. Nope. I'll let
University of Vermont.
Oh, yeah. Okay. See, I was wrong about that. So that's how our careers got started. We also have rangers. Those rangers may have a 2-year technical degree in forestry, what's called an associate degree. And they can also have an associate degree in basically any natural resource or agricultural related field nowadays that helps them to get that job. We do have some avenues to hire a ranger if somebody has worked in the forestry field and only has a high school education, but has some seasoned time there in forestry and has basically learned it on the job, then we can consider them for a position as well. We have mechanics. We have helicopter pilots, airplane pilots. We have helicopter and airplane mechanics. Radio engineers, people that just keep our radio equipment going, office assistants, office managers, those administrative staff positions. Christy is an information officer. And so a varied type of different degree and training, depending on exactly what you want to do. But if you want to be in management and especially get to the point of possibly being state forester one day, you're going to need that 4-year degree in forestry from the SAF accredited institution. John or Mike, anything to add there?
I just probably say if people that have the 4-year degree and get into the Forest Service, there's a lot of forest management side as well. You don't have to go the fire direction. Some of us are a little more interested in that side of it. Shane, is a national incident commander. I'm a nationally recognized fire behavior analyst. Mike's working on his nationally recognized incident commander. So, the three of us here are much more on the fire side. We've taken our careers that direction, and that takes a lot of extra training, going out west, getting experience on other fires, having mentors and things like that to get you through and get you to the level where you have the competency that I think that we've finally gotten to where we can make, deal with these big events and incidents. So it's a whole nother part after your degree that you can spin off into, and it doesn't have to just be the incident commander part, there's all kinds of logistics and safety and different part of what we do from the emergency management side. That's another avenue that we get into after we've finished with our degree. So it's a diverse, interesting career path. There's a lot of ways you can go. So recommend it highly.
Michael, anything to add to that?
I think that sums up everything.
Very good. Yes, lots of experiences and training in that combined 72 years of working with the Forest Service. And we definitely don't want to leave out Jamie Dunbar. He does a lot of our graphical information, data gathering, lots of things that he has to extrapolate and interpret from data gathered from all different sources, whether it's the climate office, our raw stations, different things. So Jamie, any suggestions on career trends or how to get to the path that you got to where you are?
For me, it's similar story on education. North Carolina State, degree in forestry, environmental science, and soils. I've had an emphasis where my toes been in the water on both sides, from ecosystem management to fire suppression, prescribed fire, and so forth. I got a master's in geospatial science, and I use that, in the context of this fire environment job, as well as a lot of other things. So again, there's a little bit of everything that goes into forestry, from public speaking to, weather, things that you didn't really consider, 20 years ago, if you will, when I started this process out. But anyways, it's fun, and every day is a little bit different.
Very good. Thank you, Jamie. All right. So thank you to all of our presenters today. We are really grateful to have you on board. Before we do let everybody go, I'm going to share my screen really quickly. And what you should be seeing on your screen now is a post-webinar survey. I know we went a little bit over today, but if you will, please go ahead and snap that QR code, and our link to our post-webinar survey is going to end up in the chat if you don't have the capability for the QR code. We'd love to hear some feedback from you. What we'd like to gather is information on the webinar today, but also what improvements we can make for the future, what you, the audience, would like to see in the future as well from our F.L.A.M.E Week webinars. Last year we had all webinars every day of the week for our F.L.A.M.E Week event. This coming this season, we're having both online and offline events. So looking forward to seeing your feedback and getting some information from that. So please feel free to go ahead and snap that QR code. We'll also, for the sake of time, go ahead and send it to you via email as well from your registration. And finally, thank you for attending. If you are interested in learning more about the North Carolina Forest Service and a plethora of different topics that we offer, please feel free to snap that QR code for our subscription service. You can receive updates and email based on the topics of your interest via email or via text. And you can find us at all of those links and socials on the right-hand side of your screen. Thank you very much for joining us today. And we really appreciate you being here. We appreciate our presenters that have given us lots of good information today, and hope to look forward to hearing from them again in future years. Thanks, everyone. Take care.